All right, back again. 2014 Fantasy Football Podcast. As I mentioned via email, and I think during the draft, for those of you that weren't busy stuffing themselves with pizza bagels or giant sandwiches, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently this year, format-wise. So I don't want to hear any complaints about it. I think it'll be better this way. It's going to be obviously a lot less work for me, which is good, but it also will kind of, allow me to expound on certain league topics, popular things, issues of the week, sort of hot button issues, if you will, and obviously also still responding to mailbag questions, so keep those coming in. But really to understand the idea of the format shift behind the podcast, we can go look at a little bit at the history of the podcast. Let's look at how this thing came together. It was, a couple of years ago. I want to say this is the fourth year I've been doing it. The first year I got the idea from a friend of mine, a guy named Charles Brandel, some of you might know, who was in a league where a guy did sort of a similar idea doing podcasts, but it was basically like a news update. It was like a SportsCenter update, like a 1 minute hit with like the scores and the matchups that next week, and he would just, kind of email it out. And so I thought that was a funny idea, but I thought it could obviously be funnier if, it was sort of more analytical. There's some commentary. There was kind of an analysis of what was going on. And so that was how I started it. It coincided essentially with my departure from my job in the NBA, working for the Milwaukee Bucks. So I had nothing but time to sit around and work on the podcast. And then I moved back to Chicago, started work again and was still able to kind of do it. Now as my life and all of our lives and careers are kind of evolving, obviously, the time that I can spend editing and writing and recording and conceptualizing a podcast for a fantasy football league is somewhat limited. And so, it's just time to switch things up a little bit. Furthermore, it had sort of been my belief that the format was a little bit stale before. I thought that, it was kind of the same thing. It was just crank out these dumb power rankings, take some time to rag on Oaks, answer some mailbag questions, and that was pretty much it. And really the power rankings were just a complete joke. I just basically would look at the standings, write down everyone for write down where they were, and then maybe switch like Billy and Ben or something, and it was just basically a quick snapshot of each team, and that was it. And it was just, it was all pre-scripted. I would sort of write jokes down, write everything down, and that was kind of it. And so, I feel like the new direction for the podcast is, if anyone is a podcast listener, outside of this illustrious podcast, I'm sort of going more, in the Bill Burr direction, hopefully a little bit more organized than what he does, because he just kind of loses it. But, this is the plan for now. So, looking at a couple of topics, things that are kind of stuck out to me. Obviously, the big news this past week was the draft. That was sort of our first league event, our kickoff to the year. Thought things went pretty well. In fact, I know things went pretty well for me. But there are obviously other individuals who didn't have quite as good of a time. So, obviously one of the big takeaways from the draft was Ariel's team and just how terrible it was. He, obviously he didn't have a whole lot of budget to start the draft, but sort of left himself in a hole, and his team, he's obviously taken some measures after the fact to try and correct things, but his team certainly needs some work. So, if you look at it, his keepers were Keenan Allen. He had Robert Griffin on the second year of a 2-year deal. Can't argue with RG3. The price is about right. Honestly, if RG3 was being drafted this year, he probably would be around $67. I think Keenan Allen is a great keeper. I thought he was off to a great start. I thought it was Keenan Allen's going to have a great year. He was great last year. And then things kind of fall off the rails a little bit. Toby Gerhart is fine. He's a fine running back. He's going to get all the carries for Jacksonville, but he's only so good when he's the only running back on your roster. So that was kind of the primary issue. He's got a great sleeper in Justin Hunter. Kendall Wright, could be good. AJ Green is obviously AJ Green. He'll be great, but this is a team that has essentially, when the draft was over, it was half a team basically, and half of a pretty bad team. So obviously there was a big rush in Fab. We can look at that as well. And Ariel did some things to shore up his squad. Let's see here. So he picked up Kirk Cousins. Obviously, as a little bit of security to RG3. I picked up Marquise Lee, another wide receiver there. And then I know he's made some trades, obviously, to shore things up a little bit. He still is confident in his ability to make the playoffs. He picked up Ben Tate. He flipped Jordan Cameron for Vernon Davis, so that was kind of a good move. He's Ariel's crafty. He knows what he's doing somewhat, but his team is pretty miserable. So, if you do look at some of the teams that had better drafts, look at the teams that had sort of sold out last year to have a bigger budget. Myself and Kraus. Kraus did a lot of his work prior to the draft starting. He went out and made a sign and trade for Adrian Peterson. He kept Antonio Brown. He kept Eddie Lacy, which was smart. He was able to flip Roethlisberger to Blosker inexplicably. And then, had a good draft with the exception, obviously, of drafting Bradford, which, there's no way he could have known that at the very second Kraus was selecting him, that his knee was tearing into shreds. But he got Brady for a good deal. He's got Des Bryant. He managed to get Des Bryant ahead of the draft, which is great for him. I think looking at Kraus's team, obviously Lacy and Peterson is, that's where it's at. He doesn't have too much depth in running back behind that. He'll have Ray Rice. It's not necessarily the 2 games that Ray Rice is going to miss. It's sort of his drop-off in production that should worry Kraus. If you look at my team, it's pretty well-rounded. I think the only... No, that's right, Oaks did it. And Bootsy as well. There was only 3 managers who filled out their entire roster here. I splurged, went hard on Drew Brees, and made sure to get Matt Ryan as the second quarterback. It's pretty difficult to argue against that as being one of the best quarterback duos in the league. Kept Monty Ball, kept Giovanni Bernard. And then, wide receiver, I would say that I do not have any big-name wide receivers, but I have a lot of, B-level, sort of second-tier wide receivers. Victor Cruz, Cordarrelle Patterson, Marcus Colston, especially when you factor, I'm going to get Brees and Colston teamed up there. And then I've got T.Y. Hilton, a Brad Bauer favorite, and then I have Martellus Bennett as a tight end, who's a touchdown machine. So, I thought things went pretty well. Definitely went according to plan. I knew I wanted Andre Ellington. I knew that I wanted to, handcuff, get Ronnie Hillman to give some support to Monty Ball. So, definitely felt good about my draft. If you look at Bootsy's team, Bootsy was the other manager who had kind of sold out last year and got up to the $400 mark, but you wouldn't really know it by looking at his team. So, his most expensive player is Tony Romo. We got for $86. Obviously, quarterbacks' prices are inflated. Second most expensive is Calvin Johnson. He got for $81. And then third place, way behind that, is Julio Jones, who actually I thought was a great pick. For $54, I think is an absolute steal, especially if you think Calvin Johnson went for $81 and A.J. Green went for $55. Julio Jones is right there. He could be the number 1 receiver in fantasy. I don't think anyone would be too surprised by that. But then past those 3 players, Bootsy doesn't have a single player that costs more than $34. In fact, most of them were under the price of $20. So he got, Decker as a keeper, but then Frank Gore for $17. He's got Rashad Jennings for $21, Joe Flacco for $13, and then a couple of sleepers. He ended up picking Josh Gordon for $6, and news just came out today he's out for the year. If Bootsy wants to sacrifice a bench spot, obviously Josh Gordon could be a pretty good keeper. So, Bootsy had a lot of cash going in this draft. I don't really know what he did with most of it, but you got to believe that he is most likely the favorite in his division now. Just because of depth. All right, looking at Fab, looking at some of the big spends that went through. The big purchase was Johnny Kraus. He got Sean Hill, the thrilling new starting quarterback for the St. Louis Rams, going in to take over for Sam Bradford for $76. Seems a little steep, but that's what the heart wants. Kraus basically spent all of his Fab money in week 1. He spent $97 of it, because he also dropped 21 on Noshan Moreno, which I'm not too sure was a good move, because I think Lamar Miller is going to be the starter there. Noshan Moreno was sort of a beneficiary of Peyton Manning last year. I think he's going to kind of regress to the mean. A great pickup, Plotzker got Kyle Rudolph for $21, which I definitely like. I think that's a good move. Rudolph is going to be good this year. And then Deutsch picked up Danny Woodhead for only $9. Woodhead, is underrated. He's one of those boring guys that you don't really want, but is going to help Deutsch compete for sure. So there's a lot of money spent. I didn't make any moves because, of course, of the full roster, but good to see people out on the hunt. All right, that's pretty much it for the topics. I did want to discuss briefly the amount of food at the draft. There was an absurd amount of food, but I won't get too into it because I want to make sure there's enough time left for the old mailbag. So first message, longtime writer Jason Plotzker says, "Twinkle, twinkle, Mr. Bauer. Imagine the following situation. You've been badly injured by getting stomped to near death by fatties during a Black Friday sale. You're rushed to the hospital, only moments away from death. If you do not receive proper medical attention, however, there are only 2 people at the hospital to help you. Drunken Ariel and Brett Siegel. You have only enough strength to mutter 3 words, which can either be, save me, Ariel, save me, Brett, or something else. So what 3 words do you say and why? That's a good one. That reminds me of the Michael Scott Office quote when he says if he was in a room with Osama bin Laden and Hitler and Toby Flenderson and he only had 2 bullets, that he would shoot Toby twice. I think my 3 words would have to be, let me die. Next message coming in from Andrew Denenberg. He says, Mr. Bauer, what was the biggest mistake at the draft? Obviously, there were a whole lot of mistakes. Some obvious candidates are me bidding $10 on Ronnie Hillman for no reason, Deutsch completely ignoring the quarterback position, or Ben becoming friends with Ariel in college in the first place. Those are solid suggestions. Obviously, me bidding $10 on Ronnie Hillman was pretty stupid. I had a lot of cash left at that point. I know Oaks, I think I had like $23 left, and Oaks had like $11 left or like $9 left. And I obviously needed Ronnie Hillman. I had to make sure that I had Ronnie Hillman. But I should have just put it at $1 and let Oaks bid me up. It was I didn't want to end the draft with money, but say hypothetically Monty Ball goes down and Ronnie Hillman breaks out and has an incredible year. Now his keeper price is more expensive than it should have been. So obviously there's no reason to do that. I wouldn't necessarily call it the biggest mistake of the draft. I think, Deutsch ignoring the quarterback position really didn't seem like a mistake at all. In fact, it seemed like it was purposeful. It seemed like Deutsch is obviously planning on selling out his 2015 campaign to ensure he picks up some quarterbacks. So, some of us anticipated that move and drafted additional quarterbacks. So Deutsch, let's talk about that later. As far as the biggest mistake from the draft, I would say really it was probably just the lack of communication regarding food that we were bringing. I thought we brought just an absurd amount of food. And don't get me wrong, I'm a man who loves food. I was eating as much as I could get my hands on, really. Smith brought those absurd Homer Simpson party subs. I brought some pizza pockets. There were some mozzarella sticks. There were some chicken fingers. There was chips. There was pizza from multiple locations. It was, rather than, the sin of lust by having some whore service drinks, we gave into the sin of gluttony, and definitely, it wasn't a mistake. It was great. All right, next question. Coming from Kraus, he says, mailbag question. Sorry for the length, but I think it's an important topic. Dieberg and I continue to say this year after year, but to reiterate, I think our league format reduces the total amount of fun we have. These rules were all added to make our league more strategic, but isn't there already plenty of strategy involved in a standard fantasy league? We could certainly add rules that wouldn't compromise the competitive balance from year to year. I think that the strategy of selling out every other year will prove to give you the best overall chance of winning it all. Also known as the Oaks approach. Ariel, Ben, and Billy, and Deutsch seem to think they can compete every year and just borrow from the next year's budget. But they're essentially fighting with one arm tied behind their back every year when multiple teams have $400 budgets. Going forward, I think a big budget team will almost always win it all, barring catastrophic injury or incredible luck. I look at a few of the teams this year that are absolutely terrible, like mine last year. Going into a year knowing you have no chance sucks and is not fun. So I ask you, why do we have rules where if you want to give yourself the best chance to win, you basically have to trash every other season? With more normal rules, there's parity, excitement, and strategy for all teams every year. Thoughts? And then he says, P.S. Get ready for an angry Ben response. No, Kraus, I think you're actually hitting on some good points here. There's definitely a pattern developing. Oaks obviously, was a dominant team last year because he had sold out the year prior. I sold out last year, and obviously there's a lot of stuff left to happen this year, but my team, on paper looks like it's going to be very competitive, and the same is true about you, Kraus. You sold out last year, and your team is on paper looks like it's the best probably in the league right now. So I think that's definitely true. But I think you touched on one point that sort of spells it out, as you said, barring catastrophic injury or incredible luck. And I think that's the reason why we all love fantasy football, is because there is always catastrophic injuries and there always is pretty crazy luck, whether it's good luck or say like Sam Bradford tears his knee up as you draft him, or bad luck. Those types of things. So, I do think that obviously certain teams are in a much better position to succeed than others, of course. If they sell out a year prior and, end up capitalizing on this year and borrow from next year's budget to buy players for this year. But, I think that kind of, and I hate this when people always do this, but it is sort of similar to real sports in that, you don't have an equal chance every year. You got to just, sometimes you're rebuilding and sometimes you're focusing on, what's going to be a good year. Sometimes you're focusing on what's going to be a bad year. I kind of like that dynamic in our league. The point being that, the competition, the actual point totals and what happens from week to week isn't necessarily the most important thing. We obviously are kind of in it for the long haul, and I think developing these sort of patterns of who has up years, who has down years, it kind of adds an extra level of strategy, and I think it's pretty fun in the end. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Trust me, I was against all of this when I first started. I was voting against trading auction dollars. I thought the sky was falling as well, but I think we've kind of developed a pretty interesting dynamic. In fact, I'd actually like to, if anyone knows someone, get like an economist to do sort of like a study of the little kind of microeconomy that we've built. Maybe someone could start by analyzing the slave markets of the early 1800s. All right, last question coming from Ariel, the man himself, the draft master. He says 3 top 12 wide receivers, 2 4-down running backs, 4th best tight end in the league, and 2 great young quarterbacks with a seasoned vet to lead them. Is my team guaranteed to win the Super Bowl or just a definite division favorite? All right, it's very funny, Ariel. I think 2 4-down running backs is, a little extreme. I'm not quite sure if I'm familiar with the expression 4-down running backs. Are they punt protectors as well? But you do have, Toby Gerhart and Ben Tate. Ben Tate with an extreme injury history, and Toby Gerhart, who's never been a starter before. 3 top 12 wide receivers is probably your closest boast to being correct, although you have Keenan Allen and you have A.J. Green. Did you trade to pick up a third one? Probably, but who gives a shit? Your team probably still sucks. And then what was the last absurd claim you made? It was 4th best tight end in the league. That's interesting. And then your quarterback situation obviously is a little bit more improved than it was at the draft, but I think you're still in a little bit of trouble. So, Ariel, I would not be too interested in your odds to win the Super Bowl. In fact, I would be very interested in what the handicap is going to be for the opponent that you play in the eventual Clown Bowl. So that's it. That's going to wrap up the podcast, this first one of 2014. We'll have an off week next week, and then we'll pick it up with the first week of games. So I hope you guys don't mind the new format too much. It obviously helped me a little bit, and glad I could keep it going for this year. Keep the mailbag questions and keep the mailbag questions coming, I should say, and we'll see you this season.